Shoe is coming at you with our breakdown on the Nike GT Cut 3. This has been one of my favorite lines to review so far. Let's do it. What's up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. As you can see, we got the Nike GT Cut 3 to break down for you today. I'm super excited to check these out with you. Like I said, it's been one of my favorite lines dating back to a few years ago whenever they first launched it. But we're going to be looking at all the different performance aspects, whether that be the cushion, the traction, the support, let you know everything about this model and how it plays on the court before you decide if you want to go out and buy it. So like I said, this has been a really fun shoe line from Nike up until this point. I did get to play in the 1s and the 2s, so I caught these on the front end. And the GT in the model title just stands for greater than. And these actually launched with a few different models. So this is one of 3. You also have the GT Jump and the GT Run. So this is the GT Cut model. Those are the other 2. And they're all like 3 different levels. Like you got the low top model. That's what we're going to be looking at today in the GT Cut. The GT Run's a little bit more of a mid-top, and then the GT Jump, I guess that's what's left over. That's a high-top silhouette. Of the 3, this has been my favorite, piece of that line to check out so far. Let's go ahead and get into it. But before we get into the basketball breakdown, I do want to give you a little bit of just kind of an overview about this model. So the first thing to touch on is going to be the price. These are going to be retailing for a little bit more, a little bit on the higher end at $190. So I mean, with that, there's typically a lot of stuff kind of jam-packed inside of this, some higher quality stuff to make that worth it. But they did get a price jump from last year's model, which I think was at $170. If I'm remembering correctly. But yeah, these are going in that $190, $200 range. So I do like this colorway though. This All-Star Edition colorway from All-Star Weekend. I think this has got like a super sweet look to it. And the GT Cut models, they've all kind of carried a little bit of a similar design, which I'm totally cool with because I think the first pair of those that came out looked super fresh. Same thing with the 2s. No complaints at all about the 3s and the way that this looks. So as far as the design of this model, I'm a really big fan. And I'm also kind of prone to low top shoes, so everyone's gonna have their preference. So I mean, feel free to go out there and check out the GT Run and the GT Jump if you wanna see some of the different options just coming out of this specific greater than shoe line from Nike. But we'll leave all that alone and we'll go ahead and get into the basketball side of this breakdown, which is gonna be starting off with the cushion. So the GT Cut is gonna be, well, first off, let me put it this way. Whenever you had the GT Cut 1s come out, this silhouette, this design, the GT Cut specifically, was kind of made to like be modeled after the Kobe Bryant shoe line. A lot of that was this kind of released whenever some of that turmoil was going on with Vanessa and Nike, whenever the Kobe's were Kobe's life tragically came to an end and they were kind of discussing how they were going to operate around that. This shoe line kind of hit the scene and it was meant to not necessarily be a replica of that, but it played very similar. You're talking about a low to the ground model, but at the same time, super comfortable. You can move around in it super easy. That's, I think, why I was drawn to it so early on whenever they first released it. But the cushion has always been one of the highlights of this shoe. In the GT Cut 1, you had like a kind of a front-loaded setup, and just to be honest, that's kind of what I prefer to play in. It feels like you got a little bit more bounce in the front portion of that shoe, just a little bit more springy, and they even built on that in the GT Cut 2. I thought last year's model was even more front-loaded. To be honest, I wasn't as big of a fan of the design on the GT Cut 2. That's not going to matter to everyone, but I do kind of like the 1s and the 3s as far as the appearance go better. But for this third model, I think they kind of dialed it back, maybe more than I would have liked. At the same time, the cushion's not going to be bad, but you do get a more responsive feel in this GT Cut 3 model compared to the 1s and 2s that just had a lot more of a front-loaded setup. That's just the way that it was. So I mean, as far as the GT Cut 3s, don't expect you're going to get the exact same soft feel. It is going to be a little bit more responsive. The sock liner, the surrounding padding, it's still going to be pretty good. There's nothing really to worry about there. And I don't want to paint this as like an uncomfortable model. That's not the issue at all. It's just, whenever you're dealing with how a shoe line have been playing so far, the GT Cut 3 isn't exactly going to give you that super bouncy feel that I and probably everyone else that had played in this model had gotten used to playing in this shoe line. But now we'll go ahead and leave the cushion alone. We'll move on to the support. As far as the support goes, that has not been an issue at all in the GT Cut 1s or 2s. Well, actually, I take that back. As far as the 2s go, there was a little bit of heel slippage there that, it seemed to affect other people more than I kind of noticed it myself. Playing in that model, as long as you lace it up super tight, which, maybe you can get away with that on some other shoes. That one you really couldn't, as you needed to lace it all the way up to the top loop, make sure that you had them on pretty securely. Otherwise, yeah, you might have a little bit of heel slippage. The GT Cut 3, No heel slippage to talk about that. I think the heel structure, the heel mold back there keeps you really secure. That's from the back end. One thing I did notice whenever you're making those sharp cuts and stuff like that, your foot will come out of the footbed, maybe just a little bit. And that's on some of those like harsher cuts. I want to make that clear because it doesn't feel like the support's going to give all the way. That being said, there's a little bit more give to the upper on this model than I definitely noticed in the ones, which were super solid there, and the twos, which were a little bit thinner on the upper, but at the same time, you didn't really get that tug, some of that like some of that movement, I guess you would have to call it, whenever you're making, you know, those hard, jagged, like step backs, certain cuts like that. So I do want to put that out there. Maybe put these on, kind of feel, get a feel for it yourself. Like I said, you have some stuff, I mean, that kind of wants to help keep you inside of the shoe or keep you inside of the, you know, the design. At the same time, it slips just a little bit. So, but as far as support goes, I mean, it's not going to be over the top. It's definitely not going to be quite in line with how the ones played and maybe even the twos from a lateral standpoint. Whenever you're talking about heel slippage, you're good to go there. Nothing to worry about. But that brings us to the traction, and that has always been a calling card for the GT Cut, shoe line. You're going to see that he's got this, just that, you know, typical herringbone pattern that are super nice. They grip the court really well. So I'm a big fan of that. There's really no movement, no sliding on there, and they don't collect dust as bad as some other shoe lines out there. Of course, if you're on a dirtier court, maybe that'll kind of ramp up a little bit more for you. But whenever it comes to the traction, this is a really nice design. That's probably going to be, you know, all things considered, the highlight of this shoe. So, I mean, with that being the case, I'm going to go ahead and grade these as an overall rating of a B to a B plus. I want to say B, but at the same time, this is a high quality model. They still put a lot of stuff into this design. It didn't translate the same way that I would have given a grade to the GT Cut 1 or the GT Cut 2, which I think both of those would have graded out at an A to an A plus. This is going to be more in that B to B plus range. One, you got to factor in the price jump. It's going to be $190 now. Now you're talking about almost 2 Benjis. You're talking about spending a little bit of money on a basketball shoe. Not really a problem whenever you have a higher quality model. That being said, this model may not hold up the best for everyone. You got a little bit of give on the upper. At the same time, it's not going to be as soft underneath your foot. And I knock it down just a touch just because I'd gotten so used to playing in that padded, that bouncy forefoot. They took that away a little bit this year. I noticed it's the first thing I noticed whenever I put them on this year, because it's the first thing I noticed whenever I put them on last year, at how much padding they had in the forefoot versus how they just kind of flattened it out, kind of almost reverted back to just a typical basketball shoe, which there's nothing wrong with that. Like I said, still not a bad model to play in, just not exactly what you had gotten used to a little bit from the cushioning perspective. And you know, the support, it's not going to be bad. It's not going to be anything over the top. The traction's really not the saving grace, but it's going to be what's just probably the top tier, the top like highlight of this design. And then of course, what does get some brownie points for me, I think these shoes look sweet. I think this is a really nice looking design. The GT Cut model from the 1, 2s, and 3s, I think they've all looked pretty good, but this 3 has an argument to be my favorite design between the 1s and the 3s. But I mean, as far as the sizing goes, you are going to have a little bit of room as far as like the length, maybe a half thumb's width left over. But whenever you're talking about the width, it's going to run on the slightly more narrow side. So I mean, that is something that's going to maybe cause some problems if you want to go a half size up, because I mean, if you prefer extra space to play in, it's kind of there. But if you have, you know, a little bit of a wider foot and you want to try and add some length, that might, you know, lead to the shoe becoming a little bit too long for you. That's just something where you're going to want to try these on in store if you get the opportunity, or just find a way to be able to size them out to make sure that that's going to work for you. But overall, yeah, B to B plus. I'm probably going to stand with a B plus because it's still a really quality model, and I've only gotten to play with them a handful of times. I would imagine that with this being so much cushioning packed into this shoe line up until this point, and even in this model, the more you play in them, I will say, the more they have kind of started to loosen up. I just haven't gotten a ton of runs in them yet. But I mean, you just do notice a different cushioning feel underneath your foot. But that's going to wrap up. But actually, before I wrap it up, just let me know down in the comments what you guys think about the GT Cut line up until this point. And if you've already had a chance to check out the 3s, let me know down in the comments if you agree or kind of what you think about this model. Also, feel free to throw it on there. Any shoes you want me to be able to check out next, I'll be happy to get that done for you. But until next time, I'm Landon from Shoewear. Peace.